You're listening to the Pulled by the Root podcast.
Hello, everyone. This is your host, Heidi Marble. It is a little bit of a cloudy day, but my heart is smiling because I finally get to interview Elle. She is someone who reached out to me. We had an instant connection. We've been able to talk and plan this interview, and I'm really excited to share her heart with you. I asked her to write a bio, and I had the biggest smile on my face when when you gave me this, Elle. So I want to read it, and it's in little tiny print. So hopefully I don't mess it up. Elle thought of Jane Austen quote from a letter written to her sister. Which of my important nothings shall I tell you first? Elle is an inveterate scribbler of words, painter and sketcher of pictures, insatiable reader of books, ponderer of ideas, lover of music, movement, delighted observer and photographer of the world around her, and the bearer of a bit of dark humor. She has a bachelor's degree in biblical studies. She is an adoptee. Her husband suggested that she add that she has 3 brilliant grown children, one very handsome dog named Angus, and one geezer. He's the geezer. Elle has heard herself described as Bohemian, and she always liked that. Oh, welcome, Elle.
Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that bio is epic. Well, maybe we can start by you explaining how you found Pulled by the Root and Pandora's Box. Why don't we start with that?
Okay. Well, I think like a lot of us who are adopted, when we start really looking into it, we start looking to see if there's other people out there. And it had never occurred to me before a few years ago that there might be. And I just stumbled across Haley Radke's Adoptees On.
Yes.
I just typed in, is there anything? And of course, there she was. And also she's Canadian. So
that's really cool. She's amazing.
So, but that meant that then on the player that I use to listen to the podcast, yours came as a suggestion when you started yours. So I listened and kept listening. And there are a couple of interviews you've had that I've listened to a couple of times, actually, because they were just so good. And then you did one where the idea of adoptees going on a search or whatever and opening Pandora's box and all this stuff comes out, and things you could never have anticipated to be a thing are suddenly a thing, especially I think when we feel I'm 50, I should be over it, right? Or beyond it, or I'm a grown up. Anyway, you were talking to your guest and he reminded that the myth of Pandora isn't just opening the box and letting out all the evil in the world. Like, it's a creation story, right? It's some culture's way of explaining why there are bad things and evil in the world. But then he remembered, or he pointed out to remember, that at the bottom of the box, there was hope. And it just struck me because quite a while before that, I had written a poem where I had put that part in. And so I knew from your website that there was a place to submit art and things like that, and it wouldn't take it. And so I messaged you.
We went on from there.
That's how it works.
Technology is so much fun.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So I just thought, well, that's kind of funny how you were talking about that. And then actually, was it your last interview? Pandora's box and hope came up again. Like, there's this universal consciousness, and I'm not terribly hippie woo-woo, but there seems to be a thread,
There's definitely a thread, Elle. And when I read your poem, and I think it would be best read by you if you wouldn't mind doing that.
I just put on
I just want to hear your voice in this. It really sat me down. It sat me down.
Did it?
Oh,
really?
For sure. Oh, yes. And I want to talk about certain chunks of it after you read it.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Plunging forward, thigh deep into what was released when the box was opened, hard wind-blown blizzard drifts of feelings, passions, losses, griefs, misunderstandings, wants versus needs. Inner eyes burn trauma snowblind. In the barren middle of struggle immense and deep longing for a return to the comfort of naivete, the ability to ignore what was finally been seen that now cannot be unseen, comes a great desire to stuff distress, disappointment, dis-ease back into their box. But this time before locking it up, shutting away misery and trouble, somehow managing with deft surgical skill to extract and keep hope.
Everything stands out, but in particular, the idea of inner eyes, the idea of the trauma snow blindness, the idea of hope in all of this suffering.
Mm-hmm.
It's just so beautifully stated in your poem. You're such a beautiful writer, Elle.
Thank you.
So what inspired the idea of, because I feel like the theme of the blizzard and the snow blindness, what inspired that in you? Were you just going there visually in your mind as you're thinking about how to describe the pain and the hope?
I think some of it is just familiar. I'm Canadian. I live in a snowy place.
Right.
You know?
So the blistering sun of the desert would not be applicable here.
Right. No, like that would be less
authentic.
You know.
Right.
Although last summer we had just brutal temperatures here, so I could have, I suppose.
Well, no, that makes sense. Your environment informs, you know.
And if anybody has ever tried to walk through a snowdrift after a blizzard, that it blows so hard and it makes these big sort of sweeping drifts that look like they should be soft, and they're really not. They're just blown into hard, like you'll still sink in it, but it just makes it difficult. I think part of it too, though, nature versus nurture, it's always usually both and rather than either or, of course. My background is on my maternal side, I'm half Russian. So perhaps there's just even some ancestral, I don't know, memory to cold spaces.
Yeah.
And part of it, and then the third part, I think, would be when I met my first mother, she had this painting or print on her wall, and it was very spare, just a few, there's not many lines in it, and there's a lot of negative space used really well. And it looks like a woman walking sort of waist deep through snow. And you can see this little person peeking out from behind her. And it looks like she's got a baby on her back. And when I met her and she pointed out, she's like, "What does that look like to you?" And she bought it years ago. And I said, "Well, it looks like she's carrying a baby." And she said, "I think that's me bringing you home."
Oh.
Oh, I'm sorry, Heidi.
It's okay. I went to Costco and I have lots of clean.
Okay.
That and mayonnaise. It's like, why do I need so much of both of these things? Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I think we need to reverse to people really need to understand your story and how you grew up. Can we just go back in time, and can you build up your story for us? You were very open and honest with me in our conversations about your lived experience, and I know so many people will be able to relate and benefit from hearing your heart on these things.
Right. Okay. So I'm in Canada. I was born in a city called Saskatoon, just a little city, 1970, and then relinquished. I can't remember, it was 4 or 5 days after, from the hospital, and went directly to my adoptive family. And then they had a waiting time where my birth mother could have changed her mind. My dad was a pastor. It was a very religious family. It was very evangelical. But both of my adoptive parents came from a German Mennonite background, though not like old colony or anything like that. It was just more sort of cultural and but very conservative and very um, task oriented and work oriented and things like this. And so I grew up in church, and I it's interesting because both and again there are good memories, of course, and yet there was a lot of cognitive dissonance, but you don't necessarily say things out loud, right? Like kids generally don't anyway, but I think especially unwittingly, unconsciously, when you're an adopted person, you just know not to bring up too many questions, right? You don't
Right.
want to rock the boat too much. And I already did that a lot, I guess. Um, I was quite close to my maternal grandfather. They only lived a couple of blocks away when we were in Saskatoon. And I guess one day when I was about 2, 3, something like that, he had said he was a very quiet man and he didn't express himself very often out loud. He wasn't forceful. I guess he said to my adoptive parents, "You will never get that girl to do anything by force."
Ooh.
And there was a funny anecdote for the family, but that sort of set the tone because I think they still thought they could. Um, and so, on one hand, I got along really well with my adopted dad. I loved helping him in the garden and things like that. I was the one of the pastor's kids, and you're always kind of spoiled as the pastor's kid. It's like you're the church's kid, kind of. Um, but there was just a lot of cognitive dissonance there. There were things that I just it didn't make sense to me. If this, then that, or if this, but you say this, and it's self-referential. And I did, end up going to college and getting that degree. Part of that was, um, I think, part of that was because I didn't know what else to do. It was still
Right.
it was still a time when, especially in church culture, maybe the rest of life was starting to realize that young women could be more than teacher, secretary, nurse, sort of thing. But in church culture, it wasn't really a thing, and I didn't know what else to do. But I am bookish, and so I thought, live in a university town, maybe teach, maybe get my master's or whatever, that sort of thing. So that's why I pursued that. Um, but for most of my life, I actually thought our most of our tension was around religion
Mm.
and rules
Mm.
and legalism. You know, this is my experience. I get that. But for me, the contradiction between the evangelical world talking about it's all about grace and whatever, and yet here are the rules you need to keep in order to not sort of, you know, lose your standing or backslide, which is a made up word, Um, I thought our tension was about that. I, I had to fight to wear nail polish. I had to, so I just thought it was all about that. And only as I grew to be an adult did I realize there's more here. It's not really just that. And wanting to be sensitive to the issues around miscarriage and infertility. I don't think my adoptive mother in particular had ever worked through the grief
Mm.
of her losing pregnancies. And especially in the evangelical world then, I don't know about now because I haven't been in it for a while, you didn't trust mental health professionals. You go to the Lord, you go to a spiritual counselor, so there's no working through, it's just like, isn't the Lord good? I'll pray it'll go away, or, this sort of thing, rather than looking at actual chemical influences or how trauma affects us, or, you know, add on top of that the fact that I think her version of religion to me seems very fear based. So
Mm.
there's a lot of anxiety. So of course she's worried if you don't believe the exact same thing, then she's going to lose you forever to a literal hell, So there's just a lot. I used to fight. I got tired of fighting. It's exhausting.
It is.
And so I tried to just be nice. Scripture says honor your parents and, be kind and forgive. And not that I didn't want to do those things, but that was exhausting then too, because I'm always holding back. I can't actually say what I think or what have you. And so there was just a lot of tension and trying to fit and then feeling like I don't fit. So then fighting a little bit, and then there was tension, and that's uncomfortable. And I felt bad because she would cry, and so there's just this constant back and forth. And I got married early. We had kids. I took fertility drugs so I actually had to work through the idea myself of not having children. But, years later, well, in and amongst all of that, and not realizing that a lot of it probably had to do with relinquishment and adoption and her unresolved grief and all of that sort of stuff. And, she had, to me, it seems she had this idea of how her family should look and how it should be, not only as a family, but then spiritually, that we're all good and we all go to church and we're, all this sort of stuff. It looks good on paper,
Mm-hmm.
I was also struggling with a lot of chronic pain. So I'm athletic, and all of a sudden I couldn't walk the dog without needing help to get my shoes off afterwards. And it was always back pain and stuff. And there came a time when I had to put down some limits, some really strict boundaries with my adoptive parents. And so I did that. And I read and reread that letter. I didn't want it to sound angry or bitter or anything. I was just so tired. So I kept reiterating in the letter, I'm not angry. I'm just so tired and I need space. And so I sent the letter. And within that week, my back pain was gone. It's never been back. Like it's never come back. It's like, it was my psoas muscle. It was my core that was just all balled up. And it had been for years and getting worse and worse and worse. And it's been gone I haven't really been in contact. We've been estranged now for 2 years. But it's never recurred. It's gone.
Oh gosh, Elle.
So
Your bravery is epic. And the fact that we have to brace ourselves as adopted people. It is that Pandora's box. Once you realize what adoption actually really means and more importantly what it means in your life amongst the construct of the family that you're placed into, that you clearly didn't feel like I can be me, I can speak. And then to be able to make the decision to be brave enough to do so, and then have I guess the consequence would be that there's no contact. But also inside of that, it's like this dichotomy of these two things that we're having to live. It's just constant. It's either trying to belong to two families or trying to, the struggle is real. So I think the point I'm trying to make is it's very encouraging to me that so many adopted people have the strength to make those decisions and then to be able to integrate the outcome in a way that feels hopefully empowering, but also a lot of grief. So how have you dealt with that? Because you write this heartfelt letter, you send it. I'm assuming that afterward is when the severance happened. But maybe you can fill us in on that moment when you placed it in the mailbox or emailed it, that when you push or you close, like woo.
Right. Yeah. So I had intended to write it longhand. I thought that would be more personal. I mean, it sounds strange to write a letter saying I need space from you and to think it matters that it's in my hand. But I thought it would seem less ranty, type it out, press send. Um, but I can't remember exactly now, but there was an event that was a certain thing made me think, no, I need to just send it now. I just need to send it. The sort of, for lack of a better term, this sounds kind of harsh, but the sort of the last straw. I sent the letter in March. The previous August was sort of the thing that started the last little loop. And they were visiting us. My adopted parents were visiting us. We live about 10, 11 hours away. And August is when our anniversary is and when my husband's birthday is. And so my adopted dad had said, we would like to take you out for dinner. And so I thought, well, that sounds good. He always likes to take us out for dinner or breakfast or something like that at some point. And so we did. Now we live in a small town. It's a little ski town. Everybody recognizes everybody. Um, we happened to be at a restaurant that was owned by a dear friend of ours. And so the moment we come in, and she's very effusive, then it's like, oh, you're here and it's your mom and dad. And she's like hovering over the table. And I'm not sure if my adoptive mother is fully cognizant that she does this. But through the years, if there's a difficult conversation, tears come. And to me, it feels manipulative. I'm sure there is true sadness there, or disappointment, or all the things that can, frustration, lots of things can make us tear up. Um, but it often felt to me that those tears would come in a way that then I would chase after her to say, I'm sorry, it's all right, what's wrong, and then we just all shove that under the carpet again. Well, we're sitting there, we've ordered, and she asks, over the years, she has asked once in a while if there's anything I've done that's wrong, if you could tell me so I can ask forgiveness. And I'd be like, I don't know what to say. Like, I don't want to flog you. I don't like, if you feel like there's something you've done, you can come to me. If not, like, I don't want to point anything out. Like, I call that like evangelical confession. It's like, because it also lands you in a spot where if the person's not ready to forgive you or to say it's okay, you as an individual can then say, well, I did my best. I asked forgiveness. I did the right thing. Basically, it's gaslighting, right? It's
Right.
sort of religious gaslighting. And anyway, we're just sitting in the restaurant, and she asks a question: am I pushy?
Ooh.
And we were sitting across from them in the booth, and I could feel my husband's hand all of a sudden squeeze my leg.
Like, don't do it.
just breathe. Like, he's
He's trying to communicate through that squeeze. Yep.
Yeah. He has really large hands, so it really goes right around my leg. So it's not like I could miss it,
Yeah, exactly. Oh.
So and I was just like, I don't know what to say, because she started to cry. The food is coming. We're in a public space where, anyway, I can't remember. My brain just kind of goes blank from there. My husband, who is very well spoken, he doesn't have a lot of words, but he is very diplomatic, and he was able to sort of smooth it over. And dinner ended okay, because that went away, basically. And we came home. I was already in reunion at that point. There was my first family had expressed that they wanted to stay unidentified from my adoptive family. Like, thank you very much for everything. But it's not a blended family. and there are as many ways to do reunion as there are us who are adopted, or as there are first mothers or adoptive parents. It doesn't all have to be, oh, now we all have Christmas together all the time and we correspond, or even that you have to meet even once. And it was just where my first family was at, which is totally fair. And so I had said that, but my adoptive mom really wanted to know. She likes to be in the know and to um, be in charge of the narrative, I guess, have some control of the narrative. And so she would say things like, "What did you say their names were again?" Like I didn't, things like this. But what I said was, I can tell you ancestral stories. I can tell you her story of how she came to have to relinquish me. I could show you pictures, especially old photos, what she looked like when she was the age that she had me. She was 19. um, and so I can involve you in some things. And so when we got home, I thought, well, this is a nice opportunity to do that. I had some photos that I could show of, um, just of first maternal family. And the funny thing is, we were out after skiing once at the pub, après ski with a bunch of friends, and had sat down, and they knew that I had done a search. They knew that I had photos and they were curious. They're on my phone. And so I showed some of them. And one is of my maternal grandmother and her wedding photo. And when we were there, so we're all sitting around, and this friend who was looking at the pictures, his mom arrived. She wasn't a skier anymore, but she's this great little Australian lady, and she came, and she's sort of easily flustered. She's just the cutest thing. And she sits down, she's getting settled, and our friend just basically pushes my phone into her face. And he's like, "Quick, mom, who does this look like?" Like, she had no context. Didn't know it was my phone. She knew nothing. And she said, "Oh, well, that's RL."
Oh my gosh.
So, and she's just, anyway, so there's that. So I'm showing pictures. I showed this photo, and it doesn't matter which or both of my adoptive parents, but they just looked and they said, "I don't see a resemblance." I was more shocked, even if, like, sometimes not everything has to come out of our mouth,
Yeah,
I want to
where's
say
the
to
speed
people,
bump?
yeah, now, admittedly, I lack a filter,
Yeah, me too.
sometimes.
I guess we really can't,
So, but especially as I get older, I learn to, sometimes I don't have to say it. Or you try to say it in a different way. It's like, "Oh, that's a really lovely photo," or there are ways. And so I was like, okay, I was going to share the thing that I can share, and you're not interested. So, or it seemed like you're not interested. Anyway, so that was August. I leave. Their birthdays are both in March. And I was just getting ready for that phone call to have to say happy birthday, and thinking about the question, am I pushy? Thinking about all the years and realizing how much of it was adoption and grief related, like dealt with grief on their end too, rather than the religious part, like that I thought I had been fighting. Like, I thought that's where all of the tension was from, honestly. Like, I grew up knowing I was adopted. I was told I was special and chosen and all the things that many of us hear. And you're like, I'm not actually special.
No,
I mean, we're all special because we're people, but I'm not. Like, you
no.
didn't go and look at a bunch of babies, hold a bunch, and think, "No, we like this one. We'll do." It's more like being at the bakery, and you pull a number, and your number comes up, and they're like, "Hey, we have a baby." Great. And so I have two older sisters. The first is their biological daughter, and then there's a middle sister who is adopted, and then there's me, much, much younger. And I'm so the youngest in that way because both of their birthdays are in March. and I can never remember which comes first. So I would always just call and say, and I meant the call. I wanted to say happy birthday, but I can never remember. So I would just call and say happy birthday. And whoever said thank you, I was like,
That's so smart.
it's terrible. It's terrible. And I would
Oh.
try to remember. And anyway, I was just starting to get really wound up again and about this phone call to have to sort of happy birthday, I love you, are you having a good day, and ignore all this other stuff that's sitting there and sort of festering. And so I wrote the letter
Mm.
and I sent it. And like I said, my back pain, my psoas pain disappeared within that week. And it's not easy because I feel it's unfortunate that it had to be like this. But
Oh,
also, I can't, you know, I have a husband and children and friends. And if I don't look after me, then how do I help look after them or be available? Or like you can only pour from an empty cup so much. Well, you can't, right? Like it's one of my favorite artists is Alanis. And there's this one line in one of her songs, like, you know, an empty bottle with holes along the bottom.
mm.
And that's how it felt. And so this
Yeah,
is how it has to be.
there's so many important points in there. One of the things that really stands out, and so many of us are hoping that adoptive parents are listening to
Hmm.
our voices,
Hmm.
because when you're an adopted person, there's going to come a time of reckoning,
Hmm.
most likely, not in every case.
Yeah. No.
And it's a frightening time, I'm sure, for everyone. But I think if parents understood how to hold space for that and to
Yeah.
provide support, even though it's scary and white knuckle their way
Hmm.
through, it would
Hmm.
actually endure us to them more. Like,
Yeah.
like what would have been different, Elle, if she would have looked at that picture and said, "Oh my gosh, she's just as beautiful as you."
Right. Yeah.
Like it's almost a rejection that you came from anywhere else.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
don't think it's intended that way, but that's where it
Mhm.
lands in the soul. And
Yeah.
so I think there just needs to be a lot more thoughtfulness and understanding. So thank you for sharing that, and the fact that it led to this very bold decision that sounds like it's given you peace, even though there is grief around all
Hmm.
of that.
Yeah. You know, there was Haley did a series on estrangement, a few
Mm.
episodes,
Oh, it's so good.
isn't it?
Hmm.
And the one, I think it was the first interview in that series, the woman who is about, I think she's like, was part of this baby scoop era as well. Like she's 50-ish or something. Um, she said, and I don't miss them. And I remember listening to that. I remember I was doing my makeup in the bathroom and I was listening to it and I was just like, drop the mic. Like
Hmm.
she said it out loud.
Yes.
Like, just a holy shit. Like
Uh-huh.
she said it out loud and good for her. Like, and not because it's not sad. Like it's really too bad that it ended up that way. But when it's been so tense and so fraught for so many years without any way of working through it because people just are unwilling to actually do that, you know, why would you miss that?
Yeah,
The tension, like,
exactly. And I
yeah.
think that's why speaking the truth is so very important, because
Hmm.
it's like that moment you're putting your makeup on and you
Yeah.
you have a moment of deep understanding.
Yeah.
Yeah, Elle. Oh my gosh. Ugh. Well, you talked a lot about the Tetris player.
Mm,
Can we just do that a little bit? And then I want to talk about when you met your first mother too.
sure.
So maybe we could
Sure.
walk
So,
around in those for a while.
yeah, sure. So Tetris, let's see. Well, you know, if you're familiar with the game of trying to make all the pieces fit, and you're flipping them around, and then you run out of time. You can't, the game ends and you haven't been able to get all the pieces. And all of a sudden one day, because of reunion, well, it started with, the 23andMe test that I took, and certain things just all started to fall into place. It was like, yeah, all the pieces, just like some expert player had just like and made it work, and answered questions, and there were explanations that made sense, and there were, yeah, it just sort of all came together. Now, it didn't like all come together and have a happily ever after necessarily, but just things made a lot of sense. In fact, at one point, finding some things out about my background, my genetic background, my husband looked at me and he just said, "You make so much more sense now."
I love that so much.
So much more sense now. Like, oh, do I? Anyway, yeah. So that was the Tetris game, where things just made sense, and there were still a lot of questions that beg other questions. Um, because I think for some of us, depending on how strict the background is, all of that, I have a very close friend who's also adopted, and they didn't feel the same connection to first family or birth family as I did. It's kind of not there, and I get it. Um, because they had a really wonderful relationship actually with their adoptive parents, and particularly adoptive mother. And so, there is many ways this can go, as there are people and personalities. We all have different characteristics and personalities in the way we see things and take in the world. And but for me, there were so many questions. I think partly because I really didn't fit in the family that I was placed. They're all like, my adoptive dad used to be a physics teacher, and I can hardly add. Like, I can't, I struggled really hard in school. There were always those meetings where teachers would be, "She's extremely bright, but she seems kind of like she's in her own little world, and if only she would apply herself." We call that ADHD now.
Oh yeah. I own mine proudly now.
Yeah, yeah. And so there were just a lot of those things. They all have their little creative bents, more in an artisan. Is it artisanal, whatever? Um, my adoptive dad likes to do a little bit of woodworking, and my adoptive mom likes to do some quilting, although they barely do any of it because they're always at the church, or they were anyway. Um, but I was much more drawn to, well, you read my bio. It's this like melange of just art,
Mm.
and in all its forms, and that, again, that's why I think I thought it was the religion part,
Right.
because in back then, at least in the evangelical world, it's kind of a waste of time at best. At worst, um, if you want to be a painter, you're gonna have to do figure drawing, and those are nudes, and that's porn. If you if you get into acting, you might have to take off, do a nude scene or kiss somebody who's not your husband, and that's immoral. There's just all of these extrapolations of how it's sort of bad, and so we want to channel your creativity, and maybe you can make the centerpieces for the ladies' meeting, And I just am not. I wasn't interested in that, and so it wasn't. It was sort of encouraged, but not really. It was more seen as, oh, this is a lovely thing about you. Maybe you're so creative. Maybe you should open up a flower shop, things like that. And so I didn't even know things like being an art curator
Mm.
was a thing, right? Like, do you, I always think of more extreme examples. We live near an area where there's a group of FLDS um, that is connected to that big one in Texas or whatever. And people often wonder, why don't the women just leave? Well, where do they go? What do they know? Where, like if it's not a choice to leave if you don't know what your choices are. And so, to a very smaller point of that, how would you know to go to school for ABC if you don't even know they exist as an option, right? Like they're your choices, and yet was it a choice if there wasn't much of a choice? You don't know what the choices are. And also when you're afraid of stepping out because now you're going to cause tension and it's your fault. And, it's just the fraught thing.
Oh, it
And
is. And then more rejection, possibly.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So not feeling like you fit has more to, yeah, I didn't look like any of them for sure. I also didn't do anything like them for sure. Um, the one thing I had always desperately wanted was to be in ballet, and dancing is wrong, of course. So that part back to the Tetris thing and the questions that beg other questions is like, who would I be? Not even if my first mother had been able to keep me, but if the system had looked at the information she gave on these papers and then looked for a family who matched it.
Right.
But the system didn't do that back then. It's just like next, like the bakery. And uh, there was a lot of grief. Like I've used this example when certain people have asked the past few years, because yeah, I kind of broke uh, almost a year and a half ago. Um, and you do therapy and things, and you hear it described a lot as you work through issues a layer at a time, like an onion. Bring up Shrek, um, like an onion. But it felt like my onion had been chopped in half, and it was just all of it all at once.
Oh, yes.
And it was a lot. And I was completely unprepared for that. Like I thought I was going into this rationally, thinking, I can work through this. And I had a therapist, and um, but yeah, I kind of broke. My husband even wondered, like, what is going on with you? Because I wasn't really communicating and realizing that ways I had been or acted or things that I had done over the years was a result of making sure that I could just sort of slide under the radar. And even you had Megan on your show,
I did.
and she
I
and
love
I
her.
she and I text sometimes and chat, and we keep meaning to actually have a phone call. And she's on the East Coast and I'm here in Rocky Mountain time. It's just anyway.
It's a thing. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. But at one point she said, she wore black so that she could fly under the radar. And I was like, oh my God, me too. Like yeah.
We're both in black. Oh my goodness. Are
And
all
I
the
just
adoptees out there in black right now?
Right. I had this thing to go to, and a friend of mine, because we live here, I didn't really have anything dressy, So she's like, come over, look in my closet. And she's pulling things out. She's like, oh, this one makes an entrance, and this one, and like, no, I don't want to make an entrance. I want to look classy, but I just like no
Right.
red dress things. Like, no.
Wouldn't it be wonderful though if the red dress just fit just right? And
Wouldn't it? Mm-hmm.
you could go dance and draw what you wanted. And
Sure.
and I think, Elle, when you were telling me that, I could just feel my heart breaking with such a deep understanding, that kind of grief. And especially at the age that we are.
Yeah.
That's why these conversations are so important, so that we can maybe help younger adopted people, or just be able
Yeah.
to help them relate and to fight for who they are and seeking for that.
Yeah.
Because I think part of the grief, and I don't know if you can relate to this, but we are tired at our age of
Mhm.
having to hold back. And it's like, how do you rebuild? And I
Mhm.
think the question I'm always asking myself is it too late?
Yes. I've
And I'm,
often
yeah, and that's
thought
a
that.
confession. And that's not to depress anyone,
No.
but it's just like, oh my goodness, all this time has passed
Yeah.
where I haven't been authentically myself. What does that even look like?
Yeah.
And where do you
Uh,
begin? And
yeah.
so,
And to what end? Like,
right.
something that I could have done maybe as a career. When you're 52, living in a ski town, it's difficult to become an art curator, for instance. Like, I know I keep going back to that one, but I remember when I found out that was a thing, I was like, I would have loved that. Would have loved that. Um, but yeah, the things that I'm interested aren't available to me here, like to sit in some intellectual ivory tower in Cambridge and
Yeah.
wear those great robes that they get to wear
Oh,
when
I
they're
know.
sitting
Those
around
are so
debating.
cool.
Yeah.
Exactly. Well, and I think we do not, I know deserve sounds entitled, but maybe that's
Mm.
okay. Maybe
Mm.
we are entitled to grieve
Mhm.
those losses. I
Yeah.
really think that is the point. And then be able to, in our circumstances, with our gifts and talents,
Mhm.
perhaps find those outlets. Maybe they won't be
Yeah.
exactly what we had dreamed, but
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
of that.
It's just being able to get to that point of, oh, you're going to get tired of this. Alanis again. The only
I
way out
love
is
it.
the only way out is through.
Mm,
That just to ignore it doesn't help either. And there have been the occasional people in my life who I've been honest with who then were like, well, it's not too late. Just do it. Like I did it. I'm thinking you're in a city with
right.
the amenities, and also it's different. It's just different. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's just a different circumstance. It's not, because while you're looking at what do I want to do now or what can I develop now, you're still also working through realizing, like, I don't know about you, but one of the things I always did that I realized the past number of years, my husband and I have talked about it a lot, is the moment I saw disappointment on his face, like if we were deciding, mm, I don't know, like where to go for a holiday. And if I suggested something that didn't really resonate with him and I saw anything cross his face that looked like disappointment or disinterest, or I would just reel that back in and just like, but what would you like to do? Like, I'll do that. I'll do that. You throw out these long lines to sort of see where people are at. And if you get a little bit of the negative, you just reel that sucker back in because you don't want to go there. And that's an entrenched habit. So not only are you, and that's why the onion felt like it was cut open, because not only I didn't just get to the layer of, and now what do you want to do? It was like, I'm realizing what my bad habits are that I don't want to do anymore. I want to have a voice. He wants me to have a voice, but it's hard for both of us for me to have a voice. Cause then when I do say something now, he's like, wait, what? Like, you, you think that? It's all of it at once. So it's
Yes.
not so easy to just, which is why I'm saying it's different than coming to a point in your life and saying, I always wanted to do this. Oh, damn it. I'm just going to do it.
No, it's so true, Elle.
All of it.
Yeah, because we have that mechanism of not wanting to be rejected, and it can really show up in so many ways that are self-sabotaging. I
Mm.
think a lot of us can relate to having to fight that on the daily,
Yeah.
not completing things, not making that call, not following up. You
Mhm.
know, I'm talking about my friend right now. Haha. But it is, and I think it's that awareness. That's the thing that really is kicking in for me lately.
Mm.
It's being aware, like the fact that you're saying you're aware when you see disappointment on someone's face that you're retracting. And
Mhm.
for me, that awareness is an opportunity to do something about it. What do you do about it? I'm not really sure yet. I'm still sorting through that.
Yeah.
But I believe there's hope. And as we begin to finish off the interview, I really want to go back to Pandora's box.
Sure.
Because, Elle, this is hard. You know, being an adopted person is difficult. There are so many people in pain and struggling.
Yeah.
And we have to have encouragement as well to keep going and to lean on each other and to be able to strengthen. So now we've got all this crap flying out of this box. And as you so beautifully stated in your poem, and some of our guests have stated, a lot of times we don't wait around to look at what's still left, which is the hope. So you have all these incredible people listening. What do you want them to know from the deepest recesses of your heart about what you wish for all of us, for yourself, for all of us?
One of my favorite spiritual teachers, his name is Alexander Shaya. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's a priest.
No.
And he's also an anthropologist. He's very accomplished. He's like sociologist. He's like another one of those people
all
with
biologists.
all of it, all of it,
all the letters.
And yeah, exactly. And his sort of big interest or slant is Celtic Christianity, because it was so holistic. Anyway, one of my favorite things I heard, I have it written down, so just a second here.
Beautiful.
Because I'm not actually sure, hope looks different for everyone, of course. And it can often seem really, it's just really out there.
Yes, I
like
agree.
how do you even like define it, or what does it mean? But he's done some shows where he's doing things around Advent at Christmas, where literally the world is getting dark and a Christmas lands on the darkest night of the year. And the Celts looked at that time as a womb time. It's resting, which I find interesting too, because we're talking about adoptees, right? That womb time. And he says, the deepest dark is not the place that grace or hope goes to die. It is the place where grace goes to be reborn. And so I've never been afraid of sitting in a dark place. At my worst, it can be a wallowy place. Like, I will fully admit that.
That's okay.
At the same time, again, the only way out is through, and to sit in that for a little bit and to let yourself sit in that. That's where the rebirth is happening. That's the regenerative, the growing, the fact that that's where the little kernel of hope or grace, however you want to put that, that's where that's getting steam again, and the light starts to break in again. And you just have to sort of be okay waiting there. Not for a big flash, not for the word from the Lord or the divine or whatever you want to call it, but just that little incremental, there's a bit more light today than there was before. There's a bit more light. Now I get it. Some of us in the Northern Hemisphere see that a little bit more dramatically than others. But yeah, it's an okay, safe place. It doesn't have to be. He often talks to that dark is always equated with like sin or badness or whatever. It's actually cozy and warm, and it doesn't have to be a negative space. It's not a negative space.
That's so beautifully stated, Elle. And our love for Black.
Yeah.
I'm obsessed with quotes, and I wrote a quote. It's so interesting that all of this is just coming together in synchronicity, but I wrote a quote about Black because it absorbs all of the color. So the
Mhm.
color exists inside of this thing that isn't really a color.
Yeah.
It's very mysterious. So that is so encouraging to hear you state that darkness is a womb. It's a space for
Mhm.
us to be quiet, to rest, and to
Yeah.
grow, even though it might not be comfortable.
Yeah.
It is. Oh goodness, this interview has been incredible, Elle, and you have to come back and talk. We
Sure.
have to talk more. And here's
Yeah.
the plan. Here's the plan.
Okay.
We are going to wear red dresses next time.
I have to get a red dress.
Are you in, or something red? Like we can wear pajama
Okay.
bottoms, or
Okay.
something. But
Okay, pajama bottoms.
on the
Black
bottom.
on top. So that's what everybody will see.
Exactly. Yeah, that way it's safe. So we can go
Yeah.
half and half, maybe a skirt. I don't know.
Sure.
But
Yeah.
some sort of red.
Okay.
No, all kidding aside, I just want to thank you so much for going into those deep places and excavating those for all of the beautiful people that are listening. And
Mm.
it's just been so wonderful to connect with you, Elle. And
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to see you. Like we talked on the phone and stuff, but to actually like chat like this is cool.
it's amazing. Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Elle.